Thanks, Joe. I don't recall that being what we rehearsed as being the introduction. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, by the way, this evening. And thank to everybody for coming along. I thought, what could I do just to sort of inject a little bit of something into this? So I know you're all giving up your evenings instead of watching the party political, that's going on at the moment. So I've injected a little bit of that into it, but not too much. So in our partly political broadcast, I've got about 20 minutes, and I'm going to concentrate entirely on the value that you drive out of a procurement for a new housing management system. And it's how you drive that value out at the beginning of the process and not the end. So I'm going to concentrate right at the very beginning in a phase that I call project readiness. And it's a phase where I believe all of the activity takes place, where you get a firm foundation, and from there that's where you build everything from successfully. So whilst I'm recognising there is a procurement phase, there is an implementation phase, I'm not going to go there this evening. We're going to take a little look at the marketplace at the moment, what makes the foundations for success, how you procure, and then some of the resourcing considerations as well. So to say whether I'm suitable for leadership, I can say that I've been in housing for 30 years. 32 years, as I described earlier, 4 months, 3 weeks and 2 days, but not that I'm counting. And during that time I've seen an awful lot of change, but I've also seen an awful lot of things that come round full circle, as I'm sure we all can relate to. I was operational for the first 15 years, so I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Housing by examination, and really from being operational and being fairly senior in local authorities as a housing manager, I moved over to the dark side of IT around about 15 years ago. That was to work for Capita. So I worked for Capita, and then people who's been in the sector for a while might know the name of Fair Software. Fair Software became SX3, which is now known as Northgate. So that was my background in terms of supplier side. I specialised in the larger side of things, so anything over 20,000 units was the territory that I used to operate in for those type of people. So whilst at Capita I put in North Lanarkshire, which was 42,000 units. I did Sanctuary way back when, put Northgate in for Sanctuary back in 2000, 2001. Did the first iWorld implementation at Nottingham and the first iWorld migration at Islington. So it's a well-known, well-used phrase, but the poacher term gamekeeper. What I now do, I run my own consultancy business. I do implementations, re-implementations, problem solving, that type of thing. I've done a couple of years at Sandwell where we did the procurement and the implementation of their housing management system. Radian, Home Group, where with re-implementations. So what I do now, I work for the client and put the knowledge of what I used to do and some of the tricks of the trade that suppliers generally tend to use, and try and work my way and navigate around that for the best return on the client. So some of the things I'm going to be talking about here are the foundations, and what are those foundations. For me, the quality of the early decisions that are made are absolutely vital, because if you've got knowledge at the beginning and you can express that knowledge, work with that knowledge, then that should just flow through the whole process. The readiness phase is we'll come on to what's within the readiness phase, but my experience is that gets time boxed. So if you're preparing to go out to tender, you tend to have, we'll do this in 3 months, and it becomes 3 months, even though you're rushing towards the end to make sure that everything's in there. But the point I'm making through all of this is that if you rush that, you get that wrong, you feel the pain. You feel the pain through the delivery of the contract and the post-implementation period because you haven't got the beginning right. So what I'm saying is you derive your efficiencies and your value for money, not from the implementation, from what you do at the very beginning. And you've got to sort of balance that out, because you're going to be quite hard, quite firm with the suppliers, and there's got to be a recognition that you've got to have some form of engagement with the supplier, but yet retain control. The candidates, by the candidates I mean the suppliers in the marketplace. To my mind, there's been years of complacency in that some of the products you can think of, the suppliers you can think of, they've rolled out the same product for years and years and years, and they may well add a new module and that type of thing, but essentially the underlying database that comes with it doesn't change at all. They just maybe reskin it and put a new front end on, then they roll it out all over again. But what I'm seeing is that there's a change in landscape, in that there've been some drivers really for this change, and I'm not saying it's the exclusive driver, but certainly one of the drivers is the new CX product. It reinvents almost what a housing management system looks like, how it behaves, what the look and feel is, and it kind of takes it away from a modular based approach more into people based approach, and what's a people's journey through a number of properties with that landlord, and they've reinvented it basically from the ground up. So that's really kicked off, to my mind, large scale development programs. And as I've listed there, Capita, Orchard, Carpera, Civica, they're all developing, and they've all got large-scale development programs underway. Some onshore, some offshore, but they're all racing to keep up at the moment. And looking forward, that can only be healthy for people who buy those systems. The interesting one is that things seem to be moving closer towards Microsoft, and whether it be SQL Server and the reporting systems that's driving that, but everybody's trying to get there. Capita traditionally, Orchard traditionally, Progress databases, now SQL, and that's the direction in which it's moving. So, I'm not sure whether I'm talking about politics or housing sector here. All come and pitch for the business. All of them, they want to engage, want us to spend money with them. They all tell us how great it's going to be. They all sell the dream. They all want the prize. Whether you're talking politics or housing management systems, there's always a form of beauty parade where they come in and they promise the world. What I'm saying is, in the integrated housing management systems, there is no such thing. There is no golden ticket. It's a phrase that my teams get sick of hearing me say. There's too many variables. The size of the stock. Suppliers generally sector themselves into the number of dwellings that a landlord has. So you'll find that companies like MIS are very successful up to sort of 1,500 units, 2,000 units, and then you get the next tier, which might be 2,000 to 8,000, and Arian, very successful there, Orchard, very successful there, and then as you move up through and you get the 20,000 plus type of organisations, that's where Oracle and Northgate and that type of thing comes into it. So when you look at the stats around all of that, you can actually pigeonhole suppliers into the dwelling sizes. Other variables, culture of organisations, existing skill sets, people might not have Oracle skills or that type of thing, Other applications, when you go out to tender for a housing management system, you might not necessarily go out to tender for a financial package or your contractor package. So that means that you've got integration issues as well, and integration aspects to think about of whether your new housing management system will fit seamlessly into that or not. And the reason that you can say successfully that there's no golden ticket is because there's more than 8 suppliers occupying exactly the same space, all making a really nice living out of it. So, if there was one clear leader, there wouldn't be 8 in the sector. So what am I saying in terms of being ready? Whenever I go and work with a client, I try and ensure that the earliest possible opportunity, they take account of those types of aspects. So when you're looking at the original business case, you're building into that right at the very beginning what your budget is, what your resource expectations are, how much of those are going to come internal, how much are going to be external, therefore how much is the backfill cost. You're going to work out whether you're going to do ODU or whether you're going to do a framework. You're looking at a statement of requirements, so you make sure that the functional aspects are all catered for. How are you going to award the contract? What percentages are you going to give? Are you going to do a 60-40 that's traditional, or are you going to put more emphasis on quality and do 70-30? How are you going to break up the 70%? Lots of questions that you need to take account of. Target operating model. I'm going to come on to that in a little bit more. Project office, having a defined space. So rather than go through all the rest of them, I'm going to pick out one or two of those and just have a look at one or two of them in a little bit more detail. Procurement. One of the key early day decisions. How are you going to procure this? What's your internal regs? What does that allow you to do? How much do you expect the overall value to be? So when you think the ODU limit, I think is about 172,000, something like that at the moment. So you've got to think, is a 3 or a 5 year cost going to take you over that threshold? Chances are it is. So you've got to decide whether you're going to do a traditional ODU procurement or whether you're going to go for the framework. There's pros and cons for each. What I'm going to run you through tonight is one that I'm currently doing. I'm not sure whether many people have seen or are using the new local authority software Crown Commercial Service framework. It's 1059, and what we're doing at the moment, rather than using a framework that's traditionally used for, a framework is something where you just go and buy it. What we're doing is we're running a mini competition within the framework. So we're almost treating it as an ODU process, but without the time constraints that come with it. I think it's worth considering for small to medium sized providers. Once you get again above 15, 20,000, it's perhaps not as relevant. So 1059, it's a Crown Commercial Service. There are lots of lots within that. Lot 5 is dedicated to housing. So on Lot 5, there are 8 dedicated housing software providers in there. All have signed up to the framework. The framework comes with a model contract. Now, one of the things that really grates on me is when I go to organisations and they've chosen the supplier and they get presented with the supplier's contract. Oh, well, sign here. Yeah, no problem. I can't live with it, sorry. What I think that we should promote through this is that through this framework, all of the suppliers that are on there have signed up to it. So they've signed up to the terms and conditions. They've even had to lodge their prices. So they're there, they're available. And they have to lodge prices for professional services and for software. Now the way they get around that is they'll have to lodge their maximum prices. So they're always allowed to discount from there. Discounts are also provided. And so if you spend more than, I won't name the suppliers, but if you spend more than 100,000 on software, one of the suppliers on the framework guarantees you a 50% discount. Speaking to them, they fill the forms in wrong. But now they've got to honour it because it's a 2-year framework. Worth knowing. The other thing is obviously the contract term. Now people in this sector tend to sign up for sort of 10, 15, 20 years, that type of thing. It's also worth knowing that these are only 5 years plus a year's extension and a year's extension. That's a maximum term. So that's the trade-off for not going down the ODU route. So the 8 suppliers. No Northgate. Northgate decided it wasn't for them. So they decided not to bid. So the other 8 are the suppliers that are on this framework. And you can make a direct award to these people if you so wish. You can run a mini competition, which is what we're doing. And that's how this works. Now, obviously there's some names on there that anybody who's been in the sector for quite a while will recognise instantly. So your Civicas, your Capitas, your Orchards, all of that. There's 2 at the bottom though, that was quite interesting. And sorry, when you use the framework, you've got to involve all 8. You can't just cherry pick. So we had to deal with a Baco, an iDocs, and have been in housing for an awful long time, never heard of a Baco. So you go and look them up and you'll find they're Italian and they are agricultural software providers who happen to provide software that runs City of Verona housing department. Somehow they found themselves on this. Now, they wasn't relevant whatsoever to what we was doing, but my project sponsor was desperate for a reference visit. So what we did, we got in touch with the bottom 2. We told them that these was going to be our requirements. Can they fulfil them? We got a letter back, a very nice letter in Italian. I believe it was very nice anyway, I couldn't read it. And they dropped out of the process. Lot 5, the significance is that it's quick. It's quick. You don't have to go through the traditional overdue methods where you send out a notice and you wait 30 days and you do something else and you wait 42 days. You can run at your own pace. The contract is very, very much slanted towards the customer and away from the supplier. There are terms in that contract that if I rewind sort of 10, 15 years, I would never sign up to as a supplier. But nevertheless, they've signed up to it, that means they're bound by it now. It contains things like service credits. So there's an SLA in there. If they don't conform to the SLA, it's in there, it's written in there, it's hard-coded, they've got to give you money back. It's great. The balance of control lies with us. The point I made earlier, it's a contract that's in our favour, our being the customer now rather than the supplier, because I can't think of anything worse than having to sign something that isn't relevant to us. So resourcing, a couple of slides on resourcing, just to sort of share with you sort of some of the things that I look at and how I put sort of numbers together. Implementation, always 1 to 8. For every 1 day that a supplier gives you, if you're implementing a new housing management system, you need 8 days from the customer. Now, some would say that's quite high. If you put it in relation to a training course, somebody will come and deliver a training course. There's maybe 6 to 8 people in the room. Somebody comes to do a workshop or talk about interfaces or whatever subject matter you can think of, there's probably 6, 8 people in the room. No matter how you do it, and I've monitored this through various implementations that I've done, I've always come out at around about the same number, whether that be 7 point something or 8. It just works. So when you start to look at my current employer, you start to think about how many days will a supplier put into that when you're doing a procurement. And I always said, ballpark, 400. So you go back to your employer and say, we need 3,200 days, please. Where's that going to come from? That's when the difficulties really start. If you divide that by 200 being 1 man year, where's the 16 people going to come from? So it's getting agreement, getting acceptance at the very early stages and building those numbers in there, because you've got to recognise that there's a governance structure, but there's also a backfill cost. So it's not just the cost of the software and the implementation, it's what's the true cost to the business. Other ratios, training, 3 to 1, 1 to 3. For a new housing management system, everybody tends to need a couple of days, sometimes 3 days. So somebody might do look and feel training, navigation training, then they might have their own module specialisations on top. By the time you're finished, you're looking at a couple of days. So if you're looking at a 1 to 3 ratio and you've got 150 staff, you know instantly that you've got somewhere between 300 and 450 training days to do. You can do your own training needs analysis from that and put it in a business case up front. And then you can say, okay, I know roughly I need 2 training venues and I need them, if I'm training 450 days and there's 8 to a course, just do the maths, you need a couple of training venues and you need them 4 weeks before you go live. Reversing that, 3 to 1. So if your training needs analysis identifies role-based courses, which generally it does, a 1-day course, if somebody's putting a 1-day course together, generally speaking, it takes between 2 and 3 days to get the data, to do the documentation, to script it, all that type of thing. Again, using these ratios, you can build something up very, very quickly. So, me being me, I'm a control freak and I'm sorry about that. But I've got to have strong governance. So as a project manager, I'm looking early days, even through readiness phases, I'm looking for a steering committee, I'm looking for a project board, I'm looking for a project sponsor. I'm banging the drum straight away on critical success factors. What's going to make this project a success? What's going to differentiate it from other projects that quite often fail in this sector? And that's some of the things. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's making sure you've got an office, making sure you've got full-time dedicated people, making sure some of them, and a good proportion of them, are subject matter experts and more relevantly, decision makers. So when suppliers come in and play their little tricks like they do about what's the answer to this, what's the answer to this? You don't know. Oh, sorry, that's another day, I'll have to come back again another time. You make sure that you've got the right people in the room at the right time. And so when you're looking at resources, yes, you're taking people from the business, but quite often you also need to think about what's your reporting elements, what's your database administration, system administration, some of your specialist type things. So you're looking at resourcing really in the round, not just from a project management perspective. And obviously I'm acknowledging that to take people from the business is difficult sometimes. And again, backfill cost doesn't often go down well. So when we're looking at what requirements do we need out of this, there's functional requirements and what I call a statement of requirements, but I use the abbreviation, sorry, it's non-functional requirements. These are things that are not functional at all, as the name suggests, but yet in any documentation before it goes out to tender, these are some of the things that I've built into the current procurement. These are things that I often build into procurements and tenders, because me being me, I want to be in control. When somebody says we can do that, I want to know what they're going to do. So I want to know about system performance. So when I press the button on that keyboard there, I'm saying that's got to refresh within 2 seconds. So I'm setting the performance standards from them. I'm setting out what the data conversion responsibilities are. So what are we going to do as a customer, but what are you going to do as a supplier, and what's the responsibility? I'm looking at service level agreements and reliability. So we're setting reliability pretty high. Perhaps not as high as private sector does, but if we're talking about 99 point something, then that's still pretty high. 99%, people sometimes don't realise that's 2 days a year you're down. That's acceptable. Maybe not. Training, I'm specifying what I want in terms of training needs analysis, trainer, project team training. I'm telling them what I want from them. I want them to come back. I'm wanting to know about their development approach, where they develop, how they develop, what methodologies do they use. I build all of that in, as well as what's coming when. So give me a pipeline of development. I'm specifying what the documentation standards are. So I'm laying out at a very early stage. If I'm doing a solution design, I want a solution design document that allows me to version control it at a certain date in time. One they don't like at all, I'm telling them what the payment profile is. They've then got to tender and come back with a price that satisfies their risk. But I've got certainty, I've got price certainty at the very beginning. So there's a lot of different things I'm doing around non-functionals. One of the things that I think I do differently to most people, reference visits and system demos. I do them up front, I do them in the readiness phase. So I go and we get a list of the suppliers, we go and do 2 or 3 reference visits, we go and talk to similar sized organisations, whoever that might be. We ask them the relevant questions about relationships and all of that, but quite often that drives out subject matter around lessons learned. How would they do it differently if they had a chance to do it again? Well, we can build all of that into the statement of requirements, because we've not gone out to tender yet. So we tend to do all of that. It's outside of the formal procurement process, so we can go and see who we want, when we want. We're not restricted if we don't want to go and see all of the suppliers, for instance. We can cherry pick. Very important, I believe, to get all of that information, not at the end of the process, but at the beginning. The actual statement of requirements itself, yes, these are the functional requirements. They've got to be comprehensive. Some of the things there, it's not a wish list. Quite often, people go out to tender and they think, well, what should we put into this? And what they end up with is a license cost for more than they end up using, and you end up paying support and maintenance on something that's never ever switched on. So it's got to be realistic. I think the compilation of the statement of requirements is a massive exercise. And I know the one that we've done is it's a 6,000 unit organisation, and the statement of requirements, we've got a 200 and something page contract and a 500 page statement of requirements. So it's fairly comprehensive. It takes time. The question for me always is, how do you future-proof it? And I'm not sure I've got an answer for that, but it's nevertheless a relevant question. What we're asking for today is integration with social media. So integration with Twitter. So if somebody's personal comes out, we're asking for the last 3 tweets, if you like, to come out on their personal page, and we're dragging that information in. Now obviously, somebody who procured 3 years ago, it wouldn't have been there really, would it? So it's how do you build in the next big thing? Statement of requirements, clarity. There's an art in being precise, and a sort of question out is, what do you see? Give me some answers. What do you see?
Duck's head.
A what?
Duck's head.
A duck's head. Anybody see anything else?
A rabbit.
You see a rabbit. Yeah? Look at it from left to right, look at it from right to left. Yeah, the rabbit's here, the duck's there. Yeah? Yeah, you got it now. Yeah, it's there somewhere, keep looking. It's very important to know what you're asking for, because there can be so much ambiguity. And I just wanted to emphasise that. If you don't get your statement of requirements right, you get workarounds. Okay? Nobody likes workarounds. Okay? Target operating model. It's about knowing in the readiness phase where you want to go to. Now, obviously, your customer is at the centre of everything that you do, but how are we going to influence people? How are we going to influence process? How are we going to influence technology and services? It's all part of a housing management system implementation, and building in some of these operating models. Now, through the readiness, you should know what your as-is business processes are. You need to know where you're getting to and how the system is going to help you get there. So, as an operating model, it really doesn't matter. In the one that we're doing now, by the way, I should explain that. It doesn't really matter in which channel it comes in, whether it's email, SMS, social networking, portal. It all gets driven in the same direction. It gets catered for through a CRM, and then the services all use that single view. So the customer's got a single view, but yet the business has a single view back of the customer. And what should happen? That should become circular, so that everything comes through one single channel. Transition to procurement. If you get all of that right, you're in good shape, and you can move through procurement and into implementation with confidence. You need a solid requirements document, the governance model's there, the business buy-in. I think one of the things that I've noticed and people might sort of resonate with is that at the end of the procurement phase is sometimes when specialists are brought in to project manage implementations. I always think they would get more value out of that person by bringing the specialist in at the very beginning, because I think the savings would be self-funding. So, last slide. I mean, absolutely no. Is there any Scots in the audience, by the way? No, great. Okay. It's a partly political manifesto, and I saw this yesterday, and I couldn't resist. And that's me done. Thank you very much.